The Tale of Nosy Nancy and the Price of Gossip. Once upon a time in the town of Peepingville, there lived a woman named Nosy Nancy. Nancy had an insatiable curiosity, and loved nothing more than prying into other people's affairs. She couldn't resist eavesdropping on conversations, peeking through windows, and spreading rumors. One sunny morning at the town market, Nancy hid behind a fruit stand, listening intently to a private conversation between Mrs. Green and Mr. Brown.
Did you hear? Mrs. Green's husband is planning a surprise party?
Nancy thought. She scribbled this juicy tidbit into her notepad, smirking with satisfaction. However, Nancy had only heard part of the conversation. What she missed was crucial context. Mr. Brown was helping Mrs. Green plan a surprise anniversary party for her sister and brother-in-law. Mrs. Green's husband wasn't involved at all. Later that day, Nancy couldn't help but share the information she had gathered.
Did you know about Mrs. Green's secret?
She whispered to a group of townspeople in the square.
I heard her husband is planning a surprise party. But get this, she was discussing it with Mr. Brown. Why would she need his help unless there's something more going on?
The group exchanged knowing glances.
A surprise party, you say?
One woman replied, arching an eyebrow.
That's odd. I saw Mrs. Green and Mr. Brown having coffee together at Rosie's diner yesterday. They seemed awfully cozy.
Nancy's eyes widened with excitement.
Really? Well, that changes everything. Maybe the party isn't from her husband at all. Perhaps it's Mr. Brown throwing the party for Mrs. Green.
As the day progressed, Nancy couldn't resist spreading her news further. At the hair salon, Nancy leaned in close to Mrs. Perkins, who was sitting with curlers in her hair.
You won't believe what I heard about Mrs. Green and Mr. Brown,
she said in a stage whisper.
Apparently, they've been meeting secretly, and now Mr. Brown is throwing her a party. I think they might be planning to run away together.
Mrs. Perkins gasped, the curlers in her hair quivering.
No, but what about their spouses? Oh, the poor dears.
By the time Nancy reached the grocery store, the story had grown even more outrageous. She cornered Mr. Johnson by the produce section.
Have you heard the latest?
She asked, her voice dripping with false concern.
Mrs. Green and Mr. Brown are having an affair. They're throwing a party to announce their love to the whole town. I heard they've already bought a house together in the next county.
Mr. Johnson dropped his basket of apples in shock.
Good heavens. But I just saw Mrs. Green's husband at the bank this morning. He seemed so happy. Oh, the poor man has no idea.
As the sun began to set, Nancy made her final stop at the local pub. There, she found a group of younger townspeople gathered for happy hour.
You young folks might not know this,
she began, relishing their rapt attention.
But there's quite the scandal brewing with the older generation. Mrs. Green and Mr. Brown. You know them, right? Pillars of the community and all that? Well, word is they've been carrying on a torrid affair for years. They're finally going public with it at some big party. I heard they've invited the whole town. Can you imagine the nerve? And get this, they're not just leaving their spouses. Rumor has it they're taking off with half the town's savings. Apparently, they've been embezzling funds from the local charities they run. It's going to be the biggest scandal Peepingville has ever seen.
The young people at the pub were aghast, immediately pulling out their phones to text their friends and post cryptic messages on social media about the impending doom facing their quiet town. By nightfall, what had started as an innocent misunderstanding about a surprise anniversary party for Mrs. Green's sister had morphed into a salacious tale of infidelity, public humiliation, and financial fraud. The peaceful town of Peepingville was buzzing with whispers, sidelong glances, and growing tension, all stemming from Nancy's runaway imagination and loose lips. The townspeople's eyes widened with interest, but not everyone was pleased. Bystanders overheard, and whispers of discontent began to spread. Soon, the rumor had twisted into something far more scandalous. Mrs. Green was having an affair with Mr. Brown, and they were planning to run away together after a goodbye party for her unsuspecting husband. The rumor spread like wildfire through Peepingville. Mrs. Green's husband, who had been out of town on business, returned to find himself the subject of pitying looks and hushed conversations. Friends began to distance themselves from the Greens, not wanting to get involved in what they perceived as a messy situation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Green was oblivious to the rumors swirling around her. She was busy helping her sister prepare for the anniversary party, unaware that her own marriage was under scrutiny. One night, as Nancy sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of notes, there was a loud knock at her door. Startled, she opened it to find an angry mob of villagers. They held letters and photographs, evidence of the misunderstandings, broken friendships, and personal pain caused by Nancy's gossip.
Why did you spread those lies about me?
Demanded Mrs. Green, tears in her eyes.
Your rumors nearly ruined my marriage. My husband thought I was having an affair with Mr. Brown. He was ready to leave me. Do you have any idea how much pain and confusion you've caused?
Mrs. Green's husband stepped forward, his face etched with a mix of relief and lingering hurt.
We've been married for 15 years.
He said, his voice trembling.
I've never doubted my wife's love until your poisonous rumors made me question everything. We've had to seek counseling to rebuild the trust that your lies shattered.
Mr. Brown, standing nearby, added.
And what about my reputation? I was just trying to help a friend plan a surprise for her sister, and suddenly I was branded as a homewrecker. My wife was ready to leave me, taking our children with her, all because you couldn't mind your own business.
Nancy was taken aback, guilt washing over her as she realized the full extent of the damage her careless words had caused.
I didn't mean to cause any harm.
She stammered, realizing the gravity of her actions.
I thought I was just sharing interesting news. I had no idea it would spiral out of control like this.
After the angry mob confronted Nancy, the repercussions of her actions continued to unfold. The next morning, as she stepped out to get her mail, she noticed her neighbors quickly shutting their curtains and hurrying inside. At the local cafe where she usually enjoyed her morning coffee, the owner reluctantly informed her that she was no longer welcome.
I'm sorry, Nancy.
He said, avoiding eye contact.
But your presence makes the other customers uncomfortable. They're afraid anything they say might become tomorrow's twisted rumor.
Shocked, Nancy turned to leave, only to find the entire cafe staring at her in silence. As she walked down the street, people crossed to the other side to avoid her. Children were hurriedly ushered inside by their parents when they saw her approaching. At the grocery store, the cashier refused to serve her.
We reserve the right to refuse service.
She said coldly.
Your gossip has hurt too many people. Find somewhere else to shop.
Nancy's phone remained silent. No one called or texted her anymore. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry messages before people started unfriending and blocking her in large numbers. Even her family began to distance themselves. Her sister called, sounding distressed.
Oh, Nancy, I'm sorry, but we can't invite you to Thanksgiving this year. No one wants to come if you're there. They're all afraid of what you might overhear and spread around town.
The final blow came when she was called into her boss's office at work.
Nancy,
He began gravely.
your actions have not only affected your personal life, but our business as well. Clients are canceling contracts because they don't trust our company's discretion with you on the team. I'm afraid we have to let you go.
Unemployed, isolated, and ostracized, Nancy fell into a deep depression. She spent days alone in her house, the weight of her actions crushing her spirit. It was during this dark time that she truly began to understand the devastating impact of her gossip. One day, as she sat alone in her living room, she heard a knock at the door. Hesitantly, she opened it to find Mrs. Green standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined.
Nancy,
Mrs. Green said,
I can see you're suffering. While I'm still hurt by what you did, I believe in second chances. The community center is starting a program on empathy and communication. Would you consider joining?
Tears welled up in Nancy's eyes. This small act of kindness in the face of all she had done broke through her defenses.
Yes,
She whispered.
I'd like that very much.
Over the next few months, Nancy threw herself into the program. She learned about active listening, empathy, and the importance of privacy. She started volunteering at the community center, initially met with skepticism but slowly earning back a measure of trust through her consistent, humble efforts to make amends. It was a long, difficult journey. Some people in town never fully forgave her. But gradually, As they saw her genuine change and tireless efforts to repair the damage she had caused, the community began to thaw. A year later, Nancy stood before the town at a community meeting.
I know I've hurt many of you,
she said, her voice shaking but sincere.
I can never undo that hurt, but I promise to spend the rest of my life being a force for kindness and unity in our town. I've learned that true friendship and community are built on trust and respect, not on secrets and gossip.
From that day forward, Nancy became known not for her rumor-mongering, but for her compassion and discretion. She became a mentor to others struggling with the temptation of gossip, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. The experience had changed Nancy forever. She had lost nearly everything before she understood the true value of integrity and the deep harm that careless words can cause. But through this painful lesson, she had gained wisdom, empathy, and a genuine connection to her community that was far more satisfying than any gossip had ever been. The moral of the story? Respect others' privacy and mind your own business. Interfering in the lives of others can cause unintended harm and disrupt the harmony of a community. Nosy Nancy learned that respecting boundaries is key to maintaining trust and peace, and that the momentary thrill of sharing gossip is never worth the potential devastation it can cause to people's lives and relationships.